Well, it's been a pleasure for us to be here. I just wanted to make sure that those of you that haven't gotten these other materials in the back, make sure that you avail yourself of them. There's a magazine back there. There's a little pamphlet that comes from Creation Ministries International that talks about 15 reasons why you can believe that Genesis is true. Just a little booklet, but if you haven't picked one of those up, make sure that you do. They're not going to do us any good to take home with us. Well, today we want to talk about the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter. There are a lot of great things that are happening there, and I want to share a little bit with you today. Now, some of you have been to the museum before. This is the front of the museum. You know, the thing about a museum, if you don't change it every year, no one will come back. Because they've already been there. They've already seen that. So the front of this building, the front of the museum, has changed tremendously since we got there. I don't know how many of you knew this, but when it first opened up, none of this was here, just the front. And the plan was for you to drive right up to the front here and let your people off and then go park. And we had some consultants in at the last minute and said, anything that we need to do to make sure we're ready to go. And they said, well, this is a good way to get your place blown up. So way out here, we put up some big barriers, big planters. And we got rid of this whole inner square here that was a half of a globe. So there have been a lot of changes in recent years. They planted the trees and did other things in front. But I want to show you some differences here about the museum. One thing that hasn't changed is the message. The message of the museum is to present a Bible-based history of the world. And we do that by concentrating on these 7 C's, the letter C. So each of these letters of C means something. Creation, that's obvious. Corruption, that's the fall of man. Catastrophe, that's the flood of Noah. Confusion, that's the Tower of Babel time. Christ, the cross, and consummation. Those 7 C's, if you think of those 7 C's, it's an easy way to look at a summary of world history. Now, it doesn't tell you about the 10 Commandments. It doesn't tell you about a lot of biblical history, but these are world-changing events. World-changing events. So that's why we've concentrated on that. That's why the museum is built around that. Initially, it was built with the idea. Ken Ham had the idea. Well, we'll build a museum and we'll have 7 rooms and we'll concentrate on 1 room for creation, and then they had a guy that was in Japan at that time. He was a creationist. He had become a Christian recently. He had been married to a Buddhist lady and lived in a Buddhist temple with his father-in-law in Japan while they were doing a project with Universal Studios for setting up designs of a museum type of display in Japan. Because he had worked for Universal Studios in this country and he was on loan there. He heard about the museum, and so he called up and said, hey, I'd like to help you with this museum. They brought him in. In a weekend, he sort of roughly sketched out this stuff and said, there's no way that you can have a world-class museum with 7 rooms. And so he changed the whole thing, and now his design went into this building, and he's the chief designer for the Ark. And it all centers around these 7 C's. I want to show you a couple different pictures. This is from over a year ago. And I want just to point out some things because there have been a lot of tremendous changes going on at the museum that I want you just to be aware of. This is Interstate 275. It goes all around Cincinnati. And we're off of exit 11. Most of you have been there, know that there's an exit down in this area that's exit 11. It's the first exit as you come into Kentucky from Indiana. And so we have now we have about 80 acres of land here. It goes back to this farm. We harvest some hay off of the fields back here for the zoo, which the zoo you can't see, but it's over in this area. But what I want to point out to you is when you look at the parking lot down here, there are some cars, but you don't see any buses. That was a little over a year ago. Now look at what's happened in this last year. And this is the significant thing that's happened. With the opening of the Ark, we're getting all kinds of tour buses coming. So this is a typical day. There's about 25 buses here. Each of those buses have 50-some people on them, and they're coming because they're coming in conjunction with the Ark and the museum. So it's a big deal. So that from a year ago last summer to today, we've had 500,000 visitors at the museum. Usually, we would average about 300,000 a year. We're going to be over double that. So this is unbelievable what's happening, and it's making a lot of changes for us at the museum. We're having to expand things so that we can accommodate those crowds. That's a good thing, but it does come with some growing pains. For instance, when we got there 8 years ago to the museum, there may have been one motorized wheelchair. Now there are about 30 every day. They're rented out. And so what happens is, you get these. Let's see. I better be careful how I say this. You get these old ladies, on these, and it's dangerous. I mean, you can't have an aisle too big. But it's not just the women, you know that. But you get all these things coming in, it takes up a lot of space. And so we're actually having to remodel a lot of the inside of the museum today. This is going to give you an idea. Here was the parking lot. We've now started to expand this whole parking lot area over here. And that now has, that has now been paved. It's actually completely paved, and we're changing actually the entrance of this museum so that the entrance will be down here, where you'll get tickets and come in to the museum by walking through part of the gardens. So a lot of changes have to take place because of this. The new parking lot will hold about 1,200 or so cars, and so it'll greatly expand things. As you come to the museum, you often will walk through the gardens, beautiful gardens, a pond, a landscaped. Now, just to, we're volunteer coordinators. So all of these walkways, the bridges in the garden, all of those have been built by volunteers. This bridge was built by volunteers. So a lot of work by volunteers. So if you have nothing to do after you've been to teen missions, and you've gotten thawed out for the winter, then come and see us in the spring, and we'll be able to put you to work. A little bit dark, but this is part of the garden's big banana leaves. We put those in there just to remind people what Adam and Eve put on after they sinned. That's not true, but anyway, you get the idea. Waterfalls, and you come into the main hall of the museum, and you're greeted there by this mastodon. This mastodon was found up in Ohio, not very far from the museum. It still had contents in its stomach. It was young. It was really very young. But interesting, it made its way, it was donated to us. And off of this main hall, you can go to the cafeteria, you can go to the planetarium, see a real interesting show about God's creation and the stars and planets. You can go into the special effects theater where the chairs might vibrate, and you'll see a presentation on Men in White. This whole theater is being remodeled. It will be a 3D theater by this summer. So lots of things happening to keep pace with our crowds. Then you go through the walkthrough. This walkthrough is walking through the 7 seas, and we start out by taking people into an area where we say, remember, folks, it's the same data, looking at it either from a biblical worldview or from a humanistic evolutionary type view. And we try to get people to think in those terms, to say, oh, I never realized it was the same stuff. We had some golfing friends of ours who was a professor back at Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania. They came and they went through the museum, nominal church people. And when we were done, I said, well, Jim, how did you like the museum? And he said, you know, this is a man was 70 plus years old at that time. He said, I never realized it was the same information. Because, you know, he thought that science gave you the facts and that the Bible just gave you religious ideas. He never realized it's the same facts, looking at it through different lenses, looking at it from a different starting point. So we start out our tour of the museum looking at a fossil dig and saying, how do you interpret this dinosaur? Do you interpret it from a creationist standpoint, or do you interpret it from an evolutionary standpoint? It doesn't take long, even when you're looking at this, to say, the evolutionists would say, well, this baby was deposited, died, covered up, and then over millions of years, erosion and stuff has exposed it. Would you expect to find that entire dinosaur, if it had died, dried out in the sun, been covered up, and then sat there for millions of years? You wouldn't expect that. It wouldn't be intact. It would be all torn apart. They would have scavenged the bones. But what happened was, remember, died, rapid burial, isolation. That's why you get a preserved thing like, you can't get that from in the evolutionary scenario. Anyway, we try to get people to think about that. And after they start to think about that and look at the universe and look at different aspects from those two different viewpoints, then we say, all right, we're going to concentrate now on what the Bible says. And so let's show you what the Bible says about these things. And so you meet some Bible characters, you see some videos of design, about 15 different design things that run for 5 or 10 minutes. If you watch all of them, you're going to be there for an hour. But these are projected, and this is the wonders room where you can see God's design in the world today. And finally, you get to the point where you start walking through the first of the 7 seas. So you walk through the Garden of Eden, and you see Adam and Eve there with animals. You see you walk through what's the first sea? Creation, corruption. You see what happens with corruption. It's still beautiful, but it's not like the Garden of Eden. And you're met by this guy that's an animatronic dinosaur, and he's sitting there, and his mouth's going up and down. And as you see little kids with their moms, they're getting closer and closer inside the mom's dress because it's too scary for them. We actually had to change the orientation of this dinosaur. It used to be turned so that it greeted you when you came into that area. And we had people fainting right there. I mean, it was just scary. And so we had to change it so that didn't happen. But you go through and you see, what's the third sea? It has to do with catastrophe. So you see a mock-up of the building of Noah's Ark. And remember, how many chapters? 4 chapters of Genesis talk about the flood. So it's a very big section of the museum that talks about the flood. You can even ask an animatronic Noah some different questions about why did he bring dinosaurs? How did he feed them? Those types of things. And he interacts with you as that happens. As you go on through, then you see a specimen that we've been given. This came from Colorado. It's called Ebenezer, and it's an allosaur. And this is the skeleton. In the front here, you'll see the skull. This is one of the 6 or 7 best preserved allosaur skulls in the world. We didn't name it Ebenezer because it's so unusual. It was named Ebenezer, and the guy on whose property it was donated it to the museum, and so we had the display made, and that's part of our museum. We've recently expanded the last of those 7 seas, Christ's cross consummation, so that we have a very interesting area where you can walk through and see some paintings and descriptions of those last 3 seas. We used to just show a movie called The Last Adam to summarize those. Now we've incorporated that into the walkthrough. After you go through that, There's still some other areas that you want to see. One of them is Dr. Crawley's Insectorium. Dr. Crawley is a radiologist. He's a retired radiologist, was in the Air Force, and he collected bugs, insects from all over the world. And so he has we have his display of his animals, or his insects, in the special insectorium. And if you want to, you can even talk to a Dr. Arthropod. You got the idea, play on words there. But this guy's an animatronic guy, and he'll answer questions for you about insects. You've heard about the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. Those people, the Greens, also have some traveling displays. And so we have a special area in the museum it's been designed by them. It gets changed about every 3 to 4 months. And so they bring in all kinds of interesting relics and old Bibles and things. It's a nice addition to the museum. And then you finish up in our gift shop, where there's all kinds of different things related to creation that you can purchase there. If you're there at Christmas time, we have we put on a free light show, if you would. It's called Christmas Town. And in that, we decorate thousands of lights all through the gardens. We have special displays and programs and people giving, acting out different Bible-type characters around. We have a live nativity in the front, but a lot of beautiful lights that runs in the month of December. This is the live nativity out in front. This guy's really alive, but I hope he's not scaring those kids. But anyway, we bring animals there, and it's a live nativity, and it's quite an interesting time. This is one of the wise men, and he's talking about his journey. He's talking about his journey to see the little child, Jesus. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the museum. Now let's go to the Ark. Okay. So the Ark, is that whole process, that whole area is called the Ark Encounter. And basically we go from 80 acres that we have around the museum to about 800 acres. And this is south of us, right off of Interstate 75. This is exit 154. And so you would exit and go up the street and park. We can handle almost 5,000 cars here. And so you park, get your tickets. I'll just put in another plug. The ticket booths are in the middle. Those are all made by volunteers. Anyway, you get your tickets there, and we'll show you what you do from that point. The Ark, the Bible says it's 300 by 50 by 30 cubits. Remember we said the cubit that we used was about 24.4 inches. That's about this length. And so that translates into an ark that we made about 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, 51 feet high. If you go from the ground all the way to the top of the sail, which is in the bow, that's about 104 feet. The ark is built up on pillars, concrete pillars. We'll show you those in a minute. Where do we get all this wood to building the ark? We got most of it from out west. In the western states, they have a lot of forest out there that have been decimated by disease in those logs. And so those trees were dead, and we harvested those trees, and they were sent to Colorado, where they machined those things. This is some of those logs. These are logs that were cut and machined in Colorado, and then they were shipped to us. I'm going to I can't even capture this properly for you, but I wanted to get you a little feel for how this baby went together. So they shipped those logs on trucks all the way from Colorado. They came in, and there were piles all around the area of the ark of these timbers. And then what they did, they got their teenage kids who were good with erector sets. No, they got some Amish people that don't play with erector sets, but they know how to put together timber. And this became the largest timber-framed structure in the world. So they put together these bends down on the ground. This is about 60 feet tall. They had a frame down below, and they would set these things together. They had been machined in Colorado. So where these things joined together, all the holes, all the tongue or the tendons and the mortises, all of those were made in Colorado. And it's a matter of putting it together. So they assembled this whole structure down on the ground, and then they lifted it with huge cranes up onto this concrete platform. Let me get you another picture that'll give you a better perspective of this. 24 pillars like this that go down, and they're anchored to bedrock. The ground level of this area used to be up here. It used to be 30 foot taller. All of that ground was taken off. Big holes were dug so that they could have a firm foundation on solid rock for these pillars. These were all built, and because of the code for building, it said if we're going to go that high, the first floor had to be concrete. I mean, Noah didn't have to do that, but we had to follow the code. So these things then were lifted into place, one over each of these 24 things, and as you see, they're lifted by huge cranes, set in place, anchored front bend with a back bend, and all these things were joined together. This was all done with the supervision of the Amish. The Amish knew how to do those types of things. So you saw that we were building in the middle. We started in the middle and started building out from the middle to the ends. Now, why do you think we did that? They did it so that we could be more efficient in building. Because once we got the middle part done, then the electricians could come in, the plumbers could come in, and they could put all the guts of this building inside while we're still moving out. So that allowed us to work even through the winter. It took us about a year for the wood construction of this. That's about a year to do that. And you can see that there are cranes and all kinds of things going on. These bent areas, these outside logs they're not logs, these are laminated beams that came to us, shipped in, these long beams shipped in from the south where they were laminated. Just to give you an idea, they have mortise and tendons, all of these things all of this is pre-drilled. It's just like an erector set when they put it up. It was unbelievable to watch this thing happen. We were there when there was trees, grass, flags for where it was going to be. We saw the hill get knocked off, dirt spread around. We saw them blast rock to get down to the bottom. So we've seen this all as the stages went along. It's been a real exciting thing to see. This is looking inside. There are ramps that go up from level to level, and all of these things then were finished. While this is going on at the site, this is about 45 miles south of where the museum is, inside our fabrication shop, which is a huge big warehouse that we converted into a fabrication shop. Guys are busy building the inside displays of that. So these displays, these displays were all constructed. This is part of Noah's living quarters. All of these things were built at our site in the warehouse. They were built to scale. We had a mock-up of the inside of the Ark in that warehouse. They would put it in there, make sure it's just right, shrink wrap it, send it down to the Ark site itself. So we made I don't know how many hundreds of cages, all kinds of cages. You can't go to Walmart and buy a cage like this. So all of these things had to be handmade. They were all made in our shop. We tried to do some, our people researched how these things might have been, so that if you look at this, these are feeding areas, and they go inside so that you could put grain here and it would go inside. This little hole here, you're going to see is part of is part of the opening where water could come in. We'll see that a little bit later. But we made hundreds of these cages in the warehouse. They also had to research and said, well, what do these kinds look like? You can't just put a cow in there. You can't put a Guernsey in there, or something like that. That probably wasn't what the kind looked like. And so our people researched and said, what was a cow kind like? What was this kind like? And so they researched that. They designed them on the computers, and then they would cut them out of styrofoam, glue them together, mold them. This is a giraffe kind, and then they would sculpt them, paint them, put hair on them. If you've been to the museum and you've seen those animals in the museum, they're pretty good. I would say these animals at the Ark are 10 times better. That's just the quality that goes into these things. It's unbelievable, the quality that you'll see at the Ark. So these are some of the animals, animal kinds that are going to go in. Some big cages that are 10 by 10 by 10 feet. So they're big. Some of those are big cages because some of the animals were big. Didn't have to have a sauropod 70-foot long cage, but you had to have some big cages for some of those animals. So finally it got done. It took about a year to do all of this construction and get most all of the displays done inside, and it was time for the grand opening. Some 6,000 to 7,000 people showed up for that grand opening of the Ark and the Ark Encounter. This is what greets you as you come into the parking lot. As you get the parking lot, you buy your tickets and you get on a bus. And you get on a bus and you take an interesting ride down through this hill, about a mile, and then you come up out of this ravine and around the corner, and all of a sudden, here's this big Ark sitting in front of you. And that's what, you don't see it. You don't really see it until you get there. From the parking lot, you're looking end on it. That's all you see. And it's really sort of distorted because the Ark is sitting on those pillars, and behind the Ark are 3 big towers. Those towers house stairways, they house restrooms, they house elevators. And by doing that, we're allowed to get about 10,000 people in that Ark at once. That's what it's rated for fire code-wise. So those things were moved outside the Ark, and that's why you have those towers. You can't see that from the front, but from the parking lot, you see these towers, and you see the end, the stern end of the Ark from the parking lot. So you get on a bus, and you take that bus, and it brings you from way over here, around and around, and you come up and you see this Ark in the distance, and they let you out and you walk over to that. Again, these things are in the process. We're just adding more things all the time, but it's a very, very pretty sight. You can either go to this is the stern end. It has a big keel down here. The other end is the bow. And so you can either walk through what is called the East Village, which is this area here. There are some aviaries here where you can look at some certain types of birds and small animals. They have these 7 stone monoliths, if you would, that we don't buy any of this stuff. We make it. And so our guys made this, and each of these tell part of the story of creation. So it's really interesting as you walk through here. So you can either go to the east village, or you can walk to the west, and you're going to walk down this way through the west village, where there are a lot of concessions, where there are displays, where there are different things that you can buy or look at as you come through the west through the west village. And finally, you're getting closer to the Ark. A big pond in front. Some of you were there when that pond wasn't even full. But anyway, it's a big pond, and we'll see what happens in the future with that. But all those ponds have some little interesting problems along the way, and so we're still working out those types of things. But anyway, you get the idea. A big, big structure. You can see people in the distance. This is a big, big building. Remember, this is 510 feet long. Okay, so this is the bow. We have, remember what's on the ark? There's one door. The Bible said there was one door, so we have a ramp that goes up. We don't enter this way, but in the future we will have displays where people in animal costumes will come up into that door, just depicting how the animals might have been loaded at that time. But that's the idea. Over on the side here is Enzara's kitchen. It's about a 1,500-seat restaurant. We'll look at that in just a moment. So you enter usually by the stern, and so you come underneath down in this area, and you'll enter through a little garden area, a little maze, and then you'll get on these ramps and walk up. This is a picture from the opening day, and you come inside, and quickly you'll see some of these hundreds of cages, and you'll see Noah and his family praying. And you'll hear in the distance, you'll hear in the background music, you'll hear some animals talking, you'll hear some swaying and creaking of the boat, those types of things that may have been what Noah lived with all the time. And as you go through, especially on this first floor, now you don't see any concrete. Some of you are concerned that we had to put concrete on that first floor. It's all been covered with wood, both on the inside and outside, so you don't see any of that concrete, so you don't have to worry about seeing that. What you see are storage bins. These are those water reservoirs that I told you that we constructed for these different cages, different size cages depending upon the animals. And so people walk through this and start to get an idea. You can get a little idea of the size of the beams. Let me just point this out. These are like oil lamps, made to be oil type lamps that are throughout the ark. What do they look like on the ark? We don't know how it was, but this is what we thought they might look like. And so we designed these on the computer, built a prototype on our 3D printer, modified that, got it just like we wanted, and then sent that program to China and said, how about making us 1,000 of those? And that's how we got those lights. You'll see different displays. Again, all these displays were made in our fabrication shop back at by the museum. This is a blacksmith shop, and so he's working on things. Remember, there's 8 people on here, and things go bad. Things break on the ark. So we're trying to depict what would have happened during that year-long stay on the ark. They might have had to fix some things. So you might have had to have a blacksmith shop, you might have had a wood shop, all of those types of things. And we try to display those things as part of the walk through the ark. Maybe they grew some food there. We know for the first 40 days it was raining, cloudy. You wouldn't get much sunshine. But after that, the waters rose. But you might have been able to open up that window that was at the top to get light in. You might have been able to grow some fresh produce. We don't know, but we're trying to depict the possibilities of those types of things. Wood shop here. Here's feeding some special things to some of the animals. This is one of my wife's favorite parts of the ark, because this is a display of the fairy tale arks. How many of you grew up with that little thing that you put in your bathtub that had the giraffe out the top and that type of thing? Those are fairy tale arks, but unfortunately that's what most people think of when they think of the ark. We built this baby so that people can say, hey, God's word is really true. This baby was a big boat. It wasn't like the fairy tale ark. And so there's one area where it has all kinds of books and pictures of people that have portrayed the ark in a fairy tale type fashion. We also have a model of the ark and a cutout. This is cut in half to show people how this might have looked on a grand scale. And then there are all kinds of displays. Again, our people have put these things together. We have very talented people doing this type of stuff. So there's a display that talks about how you could have gotten light in there. Now, of course, the light's coming in from the top, the natural light, and so things at the top would be more illuminated than at the bottom. We have an area that talks about how they could have fed the animals, how they could have gotten fresh water, how they could have handled waste. All of those things are mentioned in displays. And then we were given this. This is a painting that comes from a Spanish man who made this to remind us of the rainbow. So there's all kinds of displays inside the Ark that tell us things related to the Ark. On the second and third floor, we show about a 15-minute, 20-minute video. That's what we're seeing here. This is the Noah interview. If you've not seen that, this is really interesting because this pre-flood reporter and their not their camera crew, but their artists come to interview Noah as he's building this. Real sarcastic. It's really quite clever. And so we show that on the second floor. On the third floor, we show a subsequent interview. Now, it's not with Noah, but it's after the Ark has been built in northern Kentucky. And it's interesting because now those same reporters, those same video people, the same scribes are there in modern day garb. And so it's a real interesting follow-up. I like them a lot. Anyway, also have a little area where animals are brought in from our zoo, and kids can pet these things. This area is especially designed so that they can keep it clean. People come up and down these ramps all over the place there. By the time you get to the third floor, you're in Noah's living quarters. Remember, they didn't know how long they were going to be there, so they might have taken with them some musical instruments, or maybe she took her hobby of painting things. We don't know what they did, but it wouldn't be unusual for them to take things that they might want to do for however long they're going to be on that Ark. We have a library there, Noah's library. We have his desk. Those types of things, trying to depict how life might have been on the Ark. The kitchen, how do you think about foods and preparing foods? All of those things are happening. I don't know if you've picked this up, but as we talked about people groups this morning, races, Noah's sons' wives are depicted in different shades of coloration because that's where everyone came from. They weren't all of one kind. They were a mixture, and that's where we've all come from even to this day. And as you come down, then you come back down to our gift shop, and we have lots of different things there, even some fair trade items in that gift shop. And as you go out, you may want to go over to Enzara's kitchen. Enzara is sort of chosen to be the name of Noah's wife. We're not saying that's in Scripture, but because that was a common name back in those days when we've researched this, that's what we've called this kitchen. Inside we have whole mounts of animals all around the eating area. Can seat on this level and another level upstairs. We now serve buffet style for a buffet lunch and a buffet supper, different items, and it can hold about 12 to 1,500 people. After you've been there, you may want to take a zip line. Or maybe you want to do the zip line before you eat. That could be true. But they have some big zip lines. I didn't mention this, but the folks that put those zip lines up at the museum first, they did that for nothing. They put those things up for nothing because they wanted to do something for the ministry. So they did all of that. Now they get the revenue from that. We get a very small portion of that. But then they came back and put up these long zip lines even at the Ark. So you can have quite an experience on zip lines if you want. And you want to go to the zoo. There are lots of different animals back in the zoo that you can see. There's a petting area. Now, see, the zoo is to the north of the Ark. So this is the back of the Ark. This is the stern. We were on the other side of that when we came in. This is Enzara's kitchen here, and this is part of the zoo. You can take a camel ride. Lots of different things you can do. You might have even been you might even be at the Ark the time of a sunset. Lots of very beautiful pictures that have come from that. Or you might come at Christmas time. Down at the Ark, we call this Christmas time, and so they've decorated the trees around there and projected lights on the Ark. What do those lights on the Ark remind you of? A rainbow, don't they? Where did the rainbow come from? God gave us the rainbow as a sign. This is not a homosexual advertisement. This is a sign of God's promise to mankind. And so it's lit up. It's lit up with these colors. Actually, it was pretty impressive when we went down there this year. And the thing that they did every hour, or on the hour 7, 8, and 9, they have about 15 high-definition projectors on this side of the pond, and they project over onto this screen. Did you know the Ark was a screen? So on this 500-foot screen, 3 times an evening for about 15 minutes, they will project the account of the history of the world. It's really very, very impressive type of thing. Well, that was quick. That sort of gave you a quick view of the Ark. What's happening right now? Well, this is a fairly recent photo from that area, and you can identify the east, west village, the Ark, different things, and Zara's. This is where the buses come, and back behind here, they're building a 2,500 seat auditorium. They've dug the holes. They got slowed down because it was so cold and pouring concrete, but this baby's already scheduled to have events this summer. I don't know how it's going to happen. We might need a few more volunteers to help there. But anyway, this is where that auditorium is going to go. This is what it's going to look like behind the bus unloading area, and this will be about a 2,500 seat auditorium. So that's what's happening at the Ark. Lots of things that are happening, lots of changes in the Ark since it opened. It opened on 7/7/17, because on Genesis 7:7 it says, "Come into the Ark." Okay, so that's why we chose that date. Since that time, so that's a year and a half, we've had 1.5 million people come through there. And it's only going to get bigger and bigger, and so we're working hard to update it and make it an enjoyable, informative, Christ-honoring experience there where people can see the importance of the gospel in their life. One way to heaven, just like there was one way to salvation at the time of the flood. One door, Christ is like that door. So that's what, that gives you a little brief summary of the Ark. I'll be happy to entertain questions. Before I do that, I just want to say a word of thanks to you all. My wife and I have had a very lovely time here. We've eaten too much. Well, I won't speak for her. She may speak for me, but I won't speak for her. Anyway, everything has been very nice. You folks have been a real blessing to us, and we thank you so much for the opportunity. Do you want to say a word?
Well, I did. I've sat on the back row this whole entire conference, and I haven't said a word. It's a little bit unusual, but
this is a miracle.
since the moment we got here, you guys have treated us so well. We walked into the office, the lady said, "We've been expecting you. Doesn't everyone love to hear that they're being expected?" Yes, and planned for. And then dear Linda took us over to our room and showed us around and everything. And that was so special. And then all the conversations around the meal tables. Thank you, students, for letting us just sit ourselves down in your midst and find out a little bit more about you. And we're impressed with what God is doing in your young lives. And we'd love to get the end of the story on a lot of you. I know you're in transition. And then being with Brother Bob, you're such a blessing to us. Thank you so very much. So you will be in our prayers. When Steve said that we are impressed with how this ministry is undergirded with prayer, that is what hits us every time we come here. It makes you unique, sad to say, from a lot of other Christian organizations. We are so blessed by that. So y'all come and see us in Northern Kentucky. We'd like to return the favor.
There are a couple brochures, one on the Ark and one on the museum back at the table. Please avail yourself of those things. If you haven't gotten some of that literature back there or some of those books, please avail yourself of those things too. I'm happy to answer.
We have one question that's very practical.
Okay.
How much does it cost to go through the museum and the Ark?
Well, the best way to go through the museum and the Ark is at 5 o'clock in the morning before anyone gets there. No. There is a fee, and I can't tell you exactly what that fee is, but you can find that online. It is on the brochure. Those things change, remember. The cheapest way to go is to go with a group, because you almost get half-price tickets.
Let's get a bus.
And that's really the cheapest way to go, and you need to get a combination ticket of both the Ark and the museum. You need to spend at least a day each place. You can spend more than that. Often people will come and get a week's ticket. That's the cheapest way to do it. And then you can come and go, and you don't have to burn yourself out one day. You can see it in the daytime. You can come back at night. All these things are different. And so it's cheaper. It's cheaper to park there, and it's cheaper to go there than it is to go to Disneyland.
It's basically $30 for the museum and $40, I think, for it. So that's why I think come and see us. We can help you with a little bit of a break on the ticket.
Okay, so that's one question. How about some other questions?
One more.
Okay.
Do you have anybody who can translate to different groups from different countries?
Do we have anybody?
Who can translate to different groups from different countries?
We can do a little bit of that. There is an app. There's an app that you can run on your cell phone at the museum, and I'm not sure if it's up and running at the Ark, where you can translate those things into Spanish. I wouldn't tell you that we have all the languages. We do make an effort when we know those groups, different type of groups are coming, or when people come who are blind. You come to see the Ark when you're blind, or you come to see the Ark when you're hearing impaired. We try to make arrangements for people that can help them in a special way with those things. But those all take special pre-arranged things. It's not done right on the spot very well.
I can see people from all over the world coming to see your...
We have people from all over the world. That's absolutely true. That's right. But when you're in Kentucky, you're used to people not talking very well, So it's, so we're somewhat used to that. All right. So yes.
I think it was the first time you came to talk about the Ark. You shared a lot of statistics about research being done for what to expect as far as people coming and whatnot. I'm just curious how that has turned out in comparison to what you were expecting.
Yes, actually we're ahead of schedule from what the projections were. So we're very pleased with that. Praise the Lord. That's all we can say. We're doing our best to make that as people-friendly as we can. And we've had some surprises. I don't think we really had a feel for the number of tour buses that would come. But there are a couple tour agencies that we've actually partnered with now, and they will come and they'll go to Branson, and they'll come up to the Ark, and they'll go to the museum, and now they're going to be adding a side trip up to the Museum of the Bible in Washington too. So we've gotten onto those things. That's a little bit of a surprise for us, and we're having to make some accommodations for that. But in general, we're a little ahead of schedule right now. That's the only thing we're ahead of schedule on. We're behind schedule otherwise. Yes?
Do the Christmas Eve, I think it was Christmas Eve special where you offer admission for free?
Yes. At both the museum and the Ark, we offer people the opportunity to come onto the grounds and tour the grounds and eat at the facility, all of that just for the price of parking. That doesn't allow you to tour the Ark, and it doesn't allow you to tour the museum. But to come onto the grounds, which normally you would have to pay even to do that, those are free at that time. Excuse me?
She's saying, is it on Christmas Eve?
It's not on,
They didn't let you in free to the museum.
Because I know I've been to the museum and I know that we went on that day.
Yes.
Yes.
Historically, they have done that.
But, okay.
yes, we let you now onto the grounds with just the price of parking, but not to tour inside.
This man is being very practical. He wants to make sure there are enough beds in the area.
No, they're not.
There's
No, they're not. No, the best thing to do is make sure you plan well in advance.
Yeah.
There are not enough hotel rooms in the area. They're building another 3 hotels right down the road from the Ark. But anyway, it's a thing that you have to plan ahead for, because it fills up, especially through the summer. It fills up very much. These tour buses, they arrange for that stuff way in advance. But for you just to come through there, it would you need to plan in advance for that, because there's not an abundance of motel rooms around, and we're talking about going up to Cincinnati. Yeah. Yep. Yes.
I have a weird one. So, my wife and I, when we were overseas, we followed this through articles. And a lot of articles that were published were obviously from secular articles.
Sure.
And I read one which I'm guessing is not true, but I'm just that the Ark Encounter was registered as a nonprofit. And then when the success of it came in and the finances were coming in so well, basically they no longer could be under nonprofit because of the amount of money that was coming in, and when they went back they had to register as a for-profit organization. And I just know a lot of it was a huge article on Yahoo. Thousands of people are commenting. I'm wondering, is that true, or is it something that Yahoo made up?
It's not true.
Okay.
Yeah. But it doesn't take much to twist stuff.
Right.
It doesn't take much to twist stuff. The most common thing that was in print before, while the Ark was being built, was that we're taking taxpayer money to build this. We raised $100 million. We raised $100 million to build this thing. There were no tax money included in that. None. Zero. The state of Kentucky has a tourism bureau. And if you are going to have a tour type activity that's going to bring people into Kentucky, they want to encourage that. NASCAR has a racetrack, Kentucky Speedway, not too far from the museum. There's a distillery in Kentucky that's part of that. If you qualify for their stringent guidelines, then you are eligible. If you meet your projections, after a year in operation, they will reimburse you for up to 15% of the tax revenue, sales revenue, that you've already turned into them. So that means they're going to get 85% new revenue. They're going to kick back 15% to you. That was the basis that we're taking away from the school kids. We're not going to have kids in school. We can't build roads. That's part of the fake news. I should have put that in my talk about fake news. There's a lot of fake news. It doesn't take much to try to distort what's happening there. But that is false. To tell you the legal how things are legally set up, I can't do that authoritatively. But basically, this whole enterprise of Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum is under the auspices of answers in Genesis. We're the people that run it, that operate it. Now there's some, I don't know what the terms are, but there are some sub-types of things, but it's a non-profit thing. Yeah, that's right. There was a time, and I'm not trying to confuse this, there was a time when they thought they would run the Ark as a profit-making venture. And what happened to that, this is unbelievable, but this is what happened. So people basically bought shares in that, and they raised $60 to $70 million with the idea that you're going to get a good return. And then a guy that worked for Bloomberg business people, a guy that knew nothing about this, wrote an article and said, hey, all you financial advisors, you need to know that most amusement parks that Christians run go bust. And you've got a fiduciary requirement that you give your people good advice. And you better be careful, because the likelihood is that this thing's going to go bust. When that happened, half of the contributions went down, and we had to change that. We had to change that whole structure, so it's all nonprofit, and that whole investment thing had to be reworked at that point.
I figured, I was just curious.
Yep. No, you'll see. It's unbelievable if the ingenuity that Satan uses to discredit God's word and His work was used for the betterment of man. Oh my goodness, we wouldn't have any of these problems. All right, some other questions? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
So have you guys had like evolutionists come to the Creation Museum, and have you heard what they said about it or what they thought about it?
Yes.
I'm curious to hear that.
Yes. We welcome evolutionists to come. I don't know if I've told this before. I don't want to bore you with this, but the evolutionists have always tried to cause trouble with this. We had a group of evolutionists that came at the opening of the Ark. There may have been 30 or 50 of those people. Some of our people purposely went out and served them cookies and drinks and tried to interact with them, because we want those people to come to know the gospel. So we invite those people in. We're not going to invite them in to cause trouble, but we're going to invite them in to learn about the gospel. So we welcome those types of people there. But those things usually backfire. When the museum was the opening of the museum, an atheist group rented a plane, and they circled around over the museum site, pulling a banner behind the plane that says, "Thou shalt not lie." That's all they did. The trouble is, no one knew where the museum was, except they followed the plane. That's what happened. So, what the Lord, what man purposes for evil, the Lord can use for good. But it happens all the time. We welcome those people, and we go out of our way to try to say, hey, bring your group and we'll get some of our people and we'll have some discussion. They want to come and cause trouble, but they haven't caused us much trouble at all. Yeah, although they've been there. Anything else? Yes, again.
How often do you see people come to salvation through either exhibit?
Yes, it's very hard to know that. I don't know numbers. We have testimonials. That's not a scientific study, but we have testimonials of people that have come to know the Lord because of that. I can't tell you how many. Yeah, but that's the goal. That's the goal of both places.
I think one thing on that question is that we've discovered it takes many touches for someone to take the whole direction of their life and turn it around. And so every day, especially those of us interfacing with museum guests, we realize that we can be rude to them and all about work, not about them and whatever, and we can turn them away. Or how we interact with them might woo them to like what we're presenting, go to our gift shops, buy resources, come back again, and years down the line we hear there maybe was a change. So we don't know most of the end of the story, but we'll find out in heaven one day, and that's going to be very exciting.